Hello everyone. If you see my community post, I ended up getting sick, which is why there was no videos last week, and as you could probably hear, I still am getting over being sick, so my voice doesn't sound the greatest still. But I am powering through because we have yet another viewer request of a missing man in Canada, and I thought it was very important to talk about this case, so I wanted to just push through and talk to you all about this. Cory Westcott was born on March 7th of 1986 in New Brunswick, Canada. At 9 months old, his family moved across the country to Trail, British Columbia, before eventually being raised in Kelowna by his mother Dee and his older sister Crystal. He was never very close with his father. Dee sang, and I quote, "I think not having a relationship with his father probably was straining for Cory. I would imagine it would be for any boy, right? His father wasn't present in his life, which Cory terribly regretted." End quote. Growing up, Cory was said to be a very active and curious child. He was interested in a range of outdoor activities, including BMX biking, snowboarding, as well as football. But around the age of 12 years old, Cory actually began working out because he was getting bullied at school. His mother saying, and I quote, "He actually started working out really hard. I had to come down on him and say, no, you're going too hard, you're going to hurt yourself." End quote. Around this time as well, Cory would start his first job, which was selling stuffed animals on the side of the road for a man who ran a claw machine. And by the age of 13, Cory actually got a job behind his mother's back working a carnival booth. Again, Dee tried to convince Cory that he was too young, but he insisted he wanted to do it. He seemed to be overall just extremely ambitious. So Dee actually ended up taking off time from her own job so that she could be at the carnival supervising Cory while he worked. Dee sang, and I quote, "He was always up to something, inventing something. He could take the VCR apart, see what it was made of, and put it back together. Thankfully, it still worked." End quote. I actually had a cousin that was like that. He actually would take blenders apart and see how they'd work. And he actually ended up hurting himself very bad when he did that because he ended up sticking his hand in the blender after turning it on, which was very traumatic, I think, for everyone, including himself. But the whole family was just like, what? Some kids are just a little too advanced for their ages, and it could be dangerous. When Cory was 18, he ended up moving to the small city of Nelson, British Columbia, located in the Selkirk Mountains of the west arm of Kootenay Lake, 300 kilometers east of Kelowna and about 40 minutes north of the U.S. border. And as you can see here, it is a beautiful, picturesque town in the middle of the mountains. It's aesthetically beautiful, but it's also the backdrop to today's case. And even people in beautiful settings can be struggling. Nelson is where Cory would meet one of his really good friends, Dan Nillo, who would invite him to go tubing on the Slocan River. Now, there's a story about how Dan had told Cory that there was no food at the river, so to pack himself a lunch. But Cory being Cory, he had other plans. Dan saying, and I quote, "And then the next day, I'm tubing down the river with a bunch of friends, and all of a sudden, there's Cory with a barbecue and a cooler selling hot dogs and hamburgers. He was just that kind of guy." End quote. From then on, Cory tried almost any kind of job that you could think of. He was a bartender, a bouncer, an oil field worker, jewelry maker, construction worker, sawmill worker. He even one time went on to do some theater school in Vancouver. When Cory was 19 years old, he would actually end up attending the festival Burning Man, and there he would end up meeting an older woman and falling in love with her. And eventually the two would actually get married. The couple would travel across the world to places like India and Thailand, and along the way, Cory ended up getting tattoos that would begin to cover most of his body. But eventually, Cory and his wife would split up due to unknown reasons. Now, according to his mother, Dee, things would take a turn in Cory's life when he actually ended up getting prescribed morphine during a dental surgery that he had. And this is where it's thought that the horrible spiral of addiction started for him. And it wasn't just addiction, a lot of hard, trying times would start to happen for Cory. In 2013, Cory's father would reach out to him from across the country in New Brunswick because he was actually on his deathbed, and he wanted his son to come visit him before he passed away. However, Cory was too far into his addiction at this point, and he never went to see his father. Around this time as well, one of Cory's very good friends would end up dying from an overdose, which was equally as hard on him. All of this most likely worsening his own addiction. Cory would eventually spend time in Vancouver. However, his mother Dee didn't really know what he was doing for work there, but he did regularly attend addiction treatments as well as meetings. And eventually Cory would return to Nelson. This time he would end up meeting a man named Chad Tonos. Chad and Cory ended up meeting at a potluck where Chad said, and I quote, "He had a big tattoo of Christ on his neck, and I'm covered in Christ tattoos as well. He was open to God. I felt a duty to him as a fellow believer." End quote. Chad said that his first impression of Cory was actually that he was intimidated by him because he had these big muscles, he was all tattooed. He said he looked like someone who may have been like a gangster or a UFC fighter. However, Cory seemed to be far from that. Most people described him as like a big teddy bear. And when the two finally began hanging out, they actually bonded over watching UFC Fight Night. And as they hung out more and more, Cory began to open up to Chad. And he wound up telling him about his desire to get clean and how he actually wanted to open up a treatment center in Nelson for other young men who were struggling with addiction, as well as those who were candidates for gangs. Despite Cory's big size and his tattoos, he was described by friends as generous and friendly with a strong Christian faith. He was also very charismatic and giving. There's a story of this one friend who ended up going out for coffee with Cory one day, and while there at the coffee shop, Cory ended up buying a bunch of sandwiches and going to hand them out to homeless people, and he would go and chat with each person as he gave them food. But no one is perfect, and neither was Cory. While he was giving and friendly, he was also said to be very direct to the point of being rude at times, and he was also sometimes politically incorrect. But at this point, he was still addicted to ketamine, and he was still losing the battle. His friend Dan saying, and I quote, "While addiction doesn't define him, it's an important part of his story," end quote. All of Cory's friends and family seemed to be aware of his addiction. It wasn't like it was something he was explicitly hiding. But he did seem to be very good at hiding how badly he was struggling, because he was said to always be laughing and cracking jokes and smiling. And Dee agreed on this statement, saying, and I quote, "Cory wanted to get better desperately. We talked about it. He said, 'Mom, if I can just shake this and get past this, life will be good.' It weighed on him. I could see the weight." End quote. And as I said, ketamine seemed to be Cory's drug of choice. And according to the American Addiction Center, and I quote, "It is utilized as a recreational drug to produce euphoric and dissociative effects, which the users have described as an out-of-body experience and a feeling as if they're melting into their surroundings. Compared to potentially less accessible drugs, such as cocaine, ketamine offers a lower price point and appears to be growing in popularity as an illicitly obtained drug." End quote. And despite still struggling, Cory was still attending rehab, he was attending church, he was also dabbling in other means of trying to get clean that aren't as conventional, such as taking ayahuasca, but he had an intent to get clean, he had that want to get clean. On Sunday, August 30th of 2020, Cory would attend church with his friend Chad. Normally, Cory was said to practice his faith in silence. However, this day things were different. His friend Chad saying, and I quote, "He stood up to sing that morning, and he had never sung like that before, ever. He was very involved in the service and singing every song, and I thought to myself, this is amazing." End quote. Chad had introduced Cory to church at Nelson's Kootenai Christian Fellowship, hoping that the community and the purpose there would help his friend deal with his addiction issues. So that day, when Cory was suddenly participating and very open, Chad thought that this was a breakthrough moment. The next day was August 31st. That morning, Cory went to the gym, and while at the gym, he ended up joking with the gym owner about how he needed to gain back the muscle he had recently lost. Again, he seemed to be in a great mood. After the gym, he ended up going out to lunch with some friends, and then he went out shopping, where he ended up purchasing some hemp t-shirts, underwear, as well as toiletries. From there, he ended up returning to his apartment on Baker Street, where he'd leave the items on the counter. We know for a fact, however, that he did open one of the packages of shirts and put one of the black t-shirts on. Next to these items that were left on the counter was $500 in cash and an old cell phone. From there, Cory ended up leaving his home, getting back in his truck, and heading towards the home of a friend named Isaac Roberts, who lived just outside of the town of Bonington, which was about a 15-minute drive outside of Nelson. On the way there, Cory ended up calling Isaac and asking him if he wanted some sushi, but Isaac declined. At 6:30 p.m., Cory is said to be caught on surveillance footage at a Shell gas station that was about halfway towards Isaac's home, located on Highway 6 near the town of Tagum. At the gas station, Cory is said to be seen wearing one of those black t-shirts that he had just purchased. He's said to fill his truck with gas, and then he buys 3 coconut waters. Before leaving, Cory ends up popping the hood of his truck and then fixing an issue that he'd been recently having with his battery. He then leaves the gas station, continuing to head towards Isaac's home, which was located somewhere on Bonington Road. As you can see here, Bonington Road is quite rural, and Isaac's property was said to be set back from the road, and it was an acre or more in size. Now, the information of what happened at Isaac's home that night is pretty limited, but there is a lot of rumors. There's rumors that Isaac was on a 3-day bender, and that Cory had allegedly gone over to Isaac's to purchase ketamine from him. It's unknown how many people were on the property when Cory arrived there. However, there is possibilities that there was some kind of party or that he was just going there to purchase drugs. However, after going to Isaac's, Cory would never be seen again. In the following days, Cory's friend Dan and his ex-girlfriend Bethany attempted to get in contact with him. However, they were unsuccessful. Cory was not responding to anyone. When days passed and still no one could get in contact with Cory, his friends would finally report him missing on September 4th. Not long after this, a pickup truck that was registered to Cory's ex-girlfriend Bethany Warren would end up being found abandoned on Rover Creek Road near the Kootenay Canal. The keys were also found inside the vehicle, which coincidentally, as you can see here on the map, was still near Bonington Falls and not very far from Isaac's property. Now, this truck would turn out to be Cory's vehicle. However, he had the vehicle registered to Bethany due to insurance reasons. Due to this, Bethany was the one contacted when the vehicle was found. Now, Bethany and Cory had only broken up about 3 weeks prior to Cory's disappearance. However, it was said that they were still very good friends. They constantly texted still and talked and seen each other. It seemed to kind of be an amicable breakup. So Bethany and Dan would end up driving over to Rover Creek Road to meet with police and claim the vehicle. But when they arrived, police simply seemed to just hand over the keys to them, didn't ask them any questions. It didn't look like they were looking for any evidence on the vehicle. It was simply, here's the keys, we're heading out of here. So this seemed to be kind of strange to them, because why weren't police trying to at least get fingerprints from the vehicle to figure out who drove it there? Why weren't they searching the vehicle for any evidence? Because Cory was thought to have last been driving this vehicle and now he's missing. So why isn't there an investigation happening? Now, it also seems like news media attempted to ask police this very same question. Had the vehicle been searched? However, police declined to answer, saying, and I quote, the case was still under investigation, end quote. So they really didn't answer the question. Bethany saying, and I quote, I was just in such shock. What does this mean? Is he found? Is he alive? Is he dead? I'm trying to wrap my head around why his vehicle is sitting out here, end quote. Now, after retrieving the vehicle from police, Bethany and Dan did something that has been very controversial. They ended up taking Cory's vehicle and driving it over to Isaac's home. And from one version of events that I seen, they did this because they wanted to see what Isaac's story was, and they wanted to see if Cory was still at Isaac's home. Bethany saying, and I quote, I wanted to look this person in the eye. I wanted to try and get a read on the situation. We talked with him. He was smiling, and he assured us he knew nothing about the disappearance, end quote. So the little that we do know from Isaac's story, Cory did come over to his home at some point. However, around midnight, Cory was asked to leave Isaac's home. It was claimed that Cory looked happy when he left and that he left in his own vehicle. However, there has also been a lot of discussion around if Cory did go over there to either purchase ketamine or do ketamine that night, how could he drive his vehicle? Because let's talk a little bit more about ketamine. According to the Alcohol and Drug Foundation, side effects of ketamine can be visual and auditory hallucinations, confusion and clumsiness, drowsiness, slurred speech, and blurred vision, and more. Ketamine is also known as the date R-word drug, if you get what I mean, which is very well known to be used to drug people so that they can't control themselves essentially and can be taken advantage of. Which would mean to me that someone in that state wouldn't be able to safely operate a vehicle, or maybe even operate a vehicle at all. So that makes me wonder, was he either not taking ketamine that night and so he was able to drive? Did he just feel more confident to drive because he had taken so much? Maybe his tolerance was lower. I'm not sure if there's a tolerance thing with ketamine. I'm not even sure if you could have a tolerance with ketamine. But then it makes me ask other questions. Why was Cory asked to leave that night? What happened to cause them to want him to leave? Or did Cory even leave there at all? According to Dee, Cory had actually been at Isaac's home the day before his disappearance as well. So Dee believes that Isaac was dealing ketamine to her son. Dee also believes, due to rumors, that Isaac was a dealer who also grew marijuana for the government. And it's due to some of these ties with illegal activity that those closest to him may not be speaking, including the alleged individuals that were there that night. Also, in a very coincidental occurrence, Isaac allegedly had security cameras around his entire property. I mean, if you're growing marijuana for the government, you probably want some kind of assurance on that. However, for whatever reason, that one specific night that Cory was there, the security cameras weren't working, which I always find odd in these cases when someone goes missing or something happens. Those are always the specific time frames that the cameras aren't working. Weird to me. Following Cory's disappearance, the police did do some investigating of some sort. They ended up flying a helicopter over the area where Cory disappeared. There were divers that were sent to the canal near where the vehicle was found to search the waters. Family and friends also held a vigil on the shoreline. But it wouldn't be until all of this that police would begin to question Dan and Bethany as well. However, Bethany claimed that she hadn't seen Cory in several weeks since they'd broken up, but there was also claims that they were constantly texting and they'd seen each other and they're in good standing. So I don't know. Now, the last outgoing call from Cory's phone ended up being around 11 p.m. the night of his disappearance. However, the call went straight to voicemail, and I couldn't find who the call was placed to. All I know is that it was to a friend, and according to this friend, the voicemail was short, and all that could be heard was noises that sounded like gurgling. However, we will apparently never be able to hear this voicemail because it ended up being automatically deleted by this friend's phone after 7 days, which is honestly just a complete tragedy to this case, because that could have been a very, very important piece of evidence. That could have been Cory's last phone call trying to call for help to somebody, if there truly was gurgling on the other end. But that also means police don't have this evidence, so we're going off the word of this friend, which I don't know why this individual would want to lie, so I do want to believe this is most likely true. And according to Dee, who has seen her son's phone records, she does say that this phone call was placed from Isaac's property, and that the phone call did happen. Now, another odd thing would happen after Cory's disappearance on September 9th, and that is when a man entered the carpet store that was under Cory's apartment, and he asked a worker if he could rent Cory's apartment. He specifically said the words Cory's apartment. He specifically said Cory's name. He then apparently did this a second time, which prompted the worker to contact the landlord, and then the landlord ended up contacting Cory's mother, Dee. What's very odd about this is, why would a man want to rent a missing man's apartment just a week or so after they went missing? How do you know they're not coming back? On top of that, it was noted that Cory actually wasn't reported missing in the media until the end of September, meaning it kind of seemed like this person had some insider information, although this is, quite a small city, so kind of everyone most likely was talking at this point, especially in these friend circles. So it was known at some level that Cory was missing. However, this unknown man would later go on to allege that Cory had actually told him that he was leaving town. But there's nothing to indicate this is true other than this man's story. And why would Cory leave town and leave his vehicle by this river and not tell anyone? It just doesn't make sense. Why would he leave $500 of cash on his kitchen counter along with underwear and toiletries and stuff like that you think that you would take with you if you were leaving town? It's just weird. Now, I guess this could just be a person who really needed a place, and he knew that Cory was missing, so he thought maybe I could try and just see. On the other hand, it's just very weird timing. Again, how do you know he's not coming back? Why would you want to take a missing person's apartment so soon after they disappeared? But according to Dee, this unknown man actually did run in the same circles as Isaac, Cory, and Bethany, because it would actually turn out that Bethany actually knew Isaac. So let's talk about Bethany for a moment here. Her relationship with Cory was said to be allegedly rocky due to them both having issues with ketamine. Now, as I said earlier, according to Bethany's story, she went over to Isaac's house after getting the keys to Cory's vehicle because she wanted to look him in the eye and hear his story. But there's also claims on top of that she didn't feel safe driving Cory's vehicle due to the battery issues that it was having, so she went to the closest place she knew, which was Isaac's home, because it was just down the road. But then it makes me wonder, was Cory's vehicle left at Isaac's home then? If she didn't feel safe driving it any farther, does she drive it to his house and leave it there? Because if so, that means you're giving access to the vehicle to one of the last people to see him alive, which is just very strange to me. And why would you want to do that? Again, we don't have any evidence of that, but I just find it strange. But at the same time, I can understand wanting to go to, this acquaintance of yours' place to look them in the eye and be like, where the hell is my friend? Where are they? The Nelson Police Department would eventually come out to say that Cory's disappearance was suspicious in nature. Meanwhile, Cory's mother Dee would take several search parties on grid searches throughout the rural area where her son had last been spotted. And they try to be as precise as possible, despite not being properly trained to do this. They even used flagging tape to make sure every inch was covered as they searched for evidence. An organization called Please Bring Me Home, which is an Ontario-based nonprofit organization, would also step in and help search at one point. Dee says that she believes there are individuals out there who know what happened to her son, however they are remaining silent. And she wants to know why. Bethany saying, and I quote, "I've never lost someone who I loved this much and meant this much to me. I've never experienced grief like this. It's a very new and hard experience for me. I can sit here and say that it's hard for me, but I can't imagine how it is for his mom and sister to have a family member just gone. Poof, no answers." End quote. Now, Dee's theory seems to be that Isaac murdered her son, hid his body somewhere, and then left his vehicle by the waterway to be found, saying, and I quote, "The nights are long, but trying to bring him home keeps me going." End quote. In September of 2021, Isaac Roberts actually ended up passing away. The RCMP ended up reporting his death as non-suspicious. But this means if Isaac had any answers as to what happened to Cory, he took them with him. However, there seems to be some reason that people believe there were other individuals there that night. So that leads me to believe that there still can be answers out there that could help lead to finding Cory. But that's kind of all the information that we have. So let's talk about some theories. As we know, Cory had issues with ketamine. However, it seems to be extremely rare that someone can OD on ketamine. You can go into what I've seen was called a K-hole, where you kind of just disassociate. Essentially, there's a lot more to it. It's not just as simple as that. But it's not like other drugs where like you take too much and you'll die. Now, it does say, however, that mixing ketamine with other drugs, even alcohol per se, can lead to you having a higher risk of something happening to you, especially since ketamine does make you so disoriented and kind of dissociated. So there is a chance of falling and injuring yourself or something like that leading to your death. But that does lead me to wonder, if he did have something happen to him, you think he would have been found by now? It makes me wonder if he did go over to Isaac's house to allegedly get drugs or party of some sort. Maybe he was given something that he normally wouldn't take and he OD'd, and then it was covered up because they didn't want to get in trouble. Or maybe if there was more illegal activity going on there at that property, maybe Cory overheard something that he wasn't supposed to have heard, so he was taken out. What doesn't make sense to me is that he would be kicked out and then drive down the road next to this river, park his car in the pitch black because there's no streetlights out there, get out of the vehicle, leave his keys in the vehicle, and then go for a walk in the dark. It was also noted that a flashlight was left in the vehicle. So if you think if he was going to go for a pitch black walk by the creek, especially if he's taking ketamine, that just sounds like an awful experience, being disoriented, walking in the dark next to water. You think he would have at least taken a flashlight possibly? I mean, there is flashlights on our phones, so I think that's a possibility too, but you'd think a proper flashlight would be brighter. However, on top of that, if something like that, for whatever reason, did happen, if he was on ketamine, I guess he could have fell into the water. It could have washed him somewhere. Maybe he hasn't been found for one reason or another due to that. But it just doesn't make sense to me that he would have left his keys in the vehicle. You think you would have put the keys in your pocket so you can come back and the vehicle's not going to get stolen from you. It's just, that just doesn't seem plausible to me. On top of that, I just find it so coincidental that Isaac's security cameras weren't working on his property that night. That night of all nights. So in my opinion, after looking at all of this, it kind of leads me more towards what Dee is saying she believes happened. That something happened to Cory on Isaac's property. His vehicle was left there to be found. It doesn't make sense to me that he was going to run off somewhere. He seemed to be having a great last few days. He was going to church. He was starting to seemingly have these breakthroughs. He had just been at the gym joking with the gym owner about wanting to gain back more muscle. He went shopping. He got some new clothes. He had cash on the counter, which why would you leave that if you were going to run off somewhere? None of that just makes sense. But I guess if we do want to look at every single angle, in my opinion, I don't think this is what happened, but I think it's important to look at every angle. Is there a possibility that Cory did do something to himself? We often do see that people act happier than normal, in the days or so before they unalive themselves. And he was acting oddly happy at church the day before. That can't just be the only indicating factor that someone's going to do something to themselves. We do have to remember, if Cory was as religious as people do say he was, the Bible does say that unaliving yourself is a sin. So you wouldn't think that he would go that way. Although I don't think it's impossible. I just think it is more unlikely. He had goals. He wanted to open up, a treatment center. It is very hard to see that someone is struggling as hard as they are. As everyone said, Cory always had a smile on his face despite his struggles. So could he have been in a lot darker place mentally than anyone realized? Possible. But he seemed to have goals. He had an ex-girlfriend he was still friends with. He was going to the gym. He was working on, his health. He was going to church. He had friends. He had family. But he was struggling. So is there a possibility he left the keys in the vehicle so that Bethany could, get the vehicle back? He did go do something to himself. I guess there is a world of possibilities. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't feel like that is the most plausible situation here. And we often see police looking towards that often. And in this case, police are saying there seems to be suspicious circumstances. Again, I find it very, very odd that the security cameras were not working that day. Why weren't they working? What would those security cameras have captured? Let's take one more good look at Cory. Cory is described as a white male standing 5'10" tall, around 209 pounds, with blonde hair and hazel eyes. He has a gold crown on one of his upper front teeth, as well as multiple tattoos covering his body, as you can see here from the photos on the screen. He also has piercings as well. Cory was last seen wearing white pants, a black t-shirt, black shoes, and a multicolored Supreme brand backpack. The vehicle he was last seen driving was a gray 2007 Toyota Tundra Crew Cab pickup. If you have any information on Cory's disappearance, I'll have the appropriate authorities to contact down below, and what I want to know is how you feel about this information that we've talked about today. Do you know anything that I didn't include in this video? Where do you sway with this? I think it's very important to cover smaller cases like this that aren't getting talked about enough, so if you want to share this video, share his missing persons flyer, share any media out there on his case, I think it could greatly help get more answers. Dee deserves to know what happened to her son. His friends and his family deserve answers, and Cory deserves to be found. As always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.